Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session on how to motivate yourself using a really effective mindset. So, I would like to start by asking you, have you ever struggled to motivate yourself? Perhaps you're a black belt procrastinator and you do everything other than the thing that you're supposed to be doing. Or maybe you just rely on beating yourself up, thinking that you're never going to achieve anything unless you speak really harshly to yourself. Or maybe you're just looking for different ways to harness your energy and fuel yourself in the direction that you want to go. Whatever starting place you're coming from, I'm hoping that this is going to be a super practical session for you. For some, it might be more of a reminder, but for some, I might hopefully share some useful things. So in terms of what we're covering today, I want to impart upon you why a growth mindset is so important to our motivation and success. We'll look at what the hallmarks are, and then we'll look at how we develop that within ourselves and in our teams. And then lastly, for those of you that are really good at beating yourselves up, I want to offer a different approach in order that you will motivate yourself over the longer term. Sometimes beating ourselves up can work in the short term, but it's not sustainable or that much fun. So if we haven't met before, hello, my name is Melissa, and I specialize in helping those in the finance sector to communicate more effectively. My background is psychology. I've had various trainings, and I particularly like working with people pleasers. I tend to think of myself as a recovered people pleaser and a retiring perfectionist, and I run programs on really how to succeed without feeling like an imposter. I don't want to talk too much about me, but if you'd like to read more about my background, that's my LinkedIn profile at the other end of that QR code. So in terms of what to expect, motivation, as you will know, is an inordinately complicated area. We are very complex human beings. We pay attention to a lot of different things. And I've just cherry picked some useful areas, research, tips, and techniques that I found super helpful, and I hope will be useful for you as well. I've drawn on cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment training, and neuroscience. There'll be some interaction. I'm going to ask for your input as we go, and there'll be time for some questions at the end. And the session is being recorded, so you can watch it again if you'd like, or share it with others, and I'll circulate that at the end this afternoon, the link. So let's start by making sure that we're all on the same page when we're thinking about mindset. Mindset is this perception of ourselves. It's our attitudes, it's our beliefs, it's the framework that we use to navigate the world. So it's really, really important. So if we grew up receiving messages that we didn't measure up or that we weren't quite good enough, we will then often internalize that message and create an identity around that. And then that will shape what we pay attention to and either fuel us in a helpful way or hold us back. And it's so important because how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive things around us really affects how we behave. So as an example, thank you, Stephanie, for welcoming. As an example, I had a terrible maths teacher, and she would shout at me if I didn't understand the exercises, and it essentially left me thinking that I'm really not very good at maths. And whenever I'm faced with some sort of calculation, I get a little bit, startled. And yet, if we'd had teachers that really understood about growth mindsets and helped us learn in a way that we found easier, perhaps we would have made different choices. And I think schools are getting better now, but it's up to us now to think about how we can shape our mindset and think about what we will pay attention to, which is partly what we're going to be covering today. And this quote really sums up my neurolinguistic programming training, essentially that the limits of our language can really limit our world. So just a very small word like yet can make a really big difference. So if you say to yourself, I'm not very good at maths, but you add on, I'm not very good at maths yet, Can you see how suddenly that extra word opens up the possibility that you could start to improve? But if we have said, I'm not very good at it, or I'm bad at math, then we are making that quite fixed and we're making it about our identity. And these are important distinctions. And much of this research rests on neuroscience. And I want to go over neuroplasticity in a simple way. It's a little bit of an oversimplification, but I really want you to understand and get this under your belt, because it really is a foundational concept to understanding the importance of the growth mindset. So many years ago, scientists thought that the brain was fixed, that you would, by a certain age, get rather baked. Nothing could develop past a certain age. And that would mean that, you felt like there wasn't actually much scope to improve or to reflect and refine. You were fixed. And now what they have discovered is that, in fact, our brains are extremely malleable. And you'll see on this slide here, you've got two neurons. So neurons are brain cells. And when we think a new thought, what happens is that an electromagnetic charge passes between those two neurons. So that's what happens when we think a new thought. And because the brain is very energy efficient, what it realizes is that if we're going to be thinking that thought again, let's make that passage easier. So it then coats that gap in white fat. The fancy name of that is called myelination, because learning is expensive from an energetic perspective. And that's why we call change is expensive, because it's drawing on a lot of our energy resources to keep firing to keep creating these new neural pathways. So essentially, what the brain does is this is how it changes shape based on the kinds of thoughts that we're thinking. And the good news is that when we are thinking thoughts that are helpful, that we want to then think again, that then can the energy then can move away from the pathways that we have created, which are unhelpful. They kind of fall into disrepair because they're not being used. And so I think when you understand this, you can get a real sense of how much more control and how much more agency you have over your mindset and your motivation and what you want to achieve. So this sort of term, what fires together wires together, is in reference to this myelination process that happens. So just to recap, neurons talk to each other during a thought. That's what happens. And then once they've talked, there's already a higher chance of them repeating that thought, since there's already connection there. And eventually repeating this thought will create this myelination. So it's a bit like laying down fiber optic cables. We just want things to be as easier and as efficient as possible. And so the way that we talk to ourselves is also very important in terms of what neural pathways are being activated and what are falling into disrepair. So yeah, we can minimize the thoughts that we don't want to have and maximize the ones that we do want to have. And so this is why I really want you to understand that you've probably got more control than you think you do. You've got more agency than you think you do. And if you would like to learn more about this, the neuroscientist that I particularly like is called Stephanie Fay, and I think she just explains things in a super straightforward way, which, if you're managing teams or, have children, I think understanding this concept is really, really important, because when you're faced with something that's tricky or challenging, you can kind of imagine what's going on in your brain is that you're making these new pathways, and that's why you might feel tired, but knowing that it's possible makes a big difference. So I hope you can see that this affects motivation in quite substantial ways. It means that we have more resilience. We can bounce back quicker because we know that this isn't just a one-off thing that just means we can't do it. It hopefully will encourage you to get back up and try again. It's not fixed, it's movable. Therefore, it hopefully will encourage us to make more effort. There's nothing more dispiriting than thinking that we have no capacity to change anything or no agency, but knowing now that we just can create more neural pathways in our brain with enough effort is, I think, rather encouraging and motivating. We can see setbacks and circumstances that don't go to plan as just opportunities to learn. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can't do it, it's just we can't do it yet. And what we make that mean is very important. If we make that mean that we are failures and it's just more proof that we're not very good, or we're never going to achieve this, then we'll go down that negative spiral. But actually, if we come at it with a mindset of, okay, what can I learn? What can I do differently? We're more likely to try again and not make the failure mean something so serious. We can focus more on the learning process, as I just explained. What can we learn about this, rather than just going for the end goal, rather than just going for the applause, rather than just going for the medal. It's like, how are we enjoying the process of getting there? And you'll probably know yourself that when we believe in our ability to grow and we believe in ourselves, or if we have struggled to believe in it ourselves, but someone else has reflected that support and capacity back to us, it boosts our self-confidence, and that then boosts our self-efficacy, which basically is another way of saying our capacity. It helps us just get off onto the right foot. And it also then increases our willingness to ask for feedback. Now, I used to absolutely dread asking for feedback. For me, getting feedback seemed very scary because I had perfectionist tendencies. And unless something was absolutely word perfect, I would feel very threatened if something wasn't, exactly right. And that can be not only a very stressful way to live, but it also can mean that you're actually limiting your capacity to grow and your skill development, because when you try something new and you're not very good at it, or you don't want to do that thing very often, equally it's we've all got room to improve in whatever area of life we're in. So feedback is a really important element of growth and development. So over the years, I've got better at asking for feedback, and I'm going to share some tips with you later in the session around how to do that. But I'd just love to hear from you. If you could just drop a yes in the chat if asking for feedback is something that you find difficult. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I've got some tips for you, because I definitely think it's about what we make it mean. And yes, there's an element of the feedback being delivered skillfully, but I think it is important that we also ask for it. And I think often in our organizations, we store up the feedback to the annual appraisal. And that can then be a really scary meeting for many of us. But one of the things I want to try and encourage us to do is get better at reflecting and debriefing after projects, so that feedback becomes just much more of a run-of-the-mill thing. What went well, it would have been even better if, and just make those kind of run of the mill conversations that we have. So we can't really talk about growth mindset without talking about Carol Dweck. And Carol Dweck was a Stanford professor, still is actually. And in her research, she noticed that people tended to fall into two camps along a continuum. There were some people that felt like their success was related to their natural talent. They were just born with a fixed amount of talent, and that's what enabled them to be good at whatever it was that they were good at. And then at the other end, there were people who felt like their success was simply down to the effort that they poured into their project or their skills. And the people who were on the effort end, she realized had this mindset, which she's calling the growth mindset. And essentially, this is what we were just talking about in terms of the neuroplasticity is that actually, yes, we are born with some talents, and these can be developed and improved upon with effort. Everyone can improve. But when we're in a fixed mindset, and we can flip between these mindsets in the day, it's not like we have one, which I think is important to note. But when we're in a fixed mindset, we believe that our qualities are cast in stone. And that can mean if we don't feel like we've got the capacity to grow and develop, then we get really busy proving that we're really good at this one thing, which can then make us even more susceptible to failure. So yeah, we do flip between them. You know, I've definitely been, as you could probably tell, in a fixed mindset around my ability to calculate complex things, but I'm in much more of a growth mindset when I'm looking at writing or communicating, you know, or psychology or what makes people tick. You know, I love learning about things like that. So yeah, we can often flip between them. And why being in a growth mindset is so key to success is because we are then continually inspired to learn. We see feedback as part of the process, and we can handle those setbacks because we're not making it mean something terrible about us. And I think what I want to impart upon you as well is that when we feel like we are learning something, if we are in a growth mindset, when we're trying to move from a place of unknown into something that we know, that can either feel like exciting and we can be full of curiosity, or it can feel really frustrating, really vulnerable making, because especially if we've tied our identity to being someone who is smart or academically talented, and then we have to go through this roller coaster process of learning, that can feel very difficult. And Dr. Becky Kennedy talks about this, in that roller coaster between unknown and known is actually called the learning zone. And one of the big feelings in that learning zone is frustration. And if we can increase our tolerance for being frustrated, we are more likely to learn more. We are more likely to increase our capacity, rather than if we just go, oh, it's too hard, tapping out, distracted onto the next thing. And why I am really sort of underlining the importance of trying to increase your comfort with discomfort is because I really believe that organizations that are going to survive and grow and develop the quickest are those that have got people who can learn the quickest inside them. You know, yes, we've got AI on the rise, which is learning very, very quickly. And yet there's always going to be a place for human skills and human relationships. And so I think our ability to learn is really, and our ability to handle that and tolerate that discomfort is really important. And many of you might know this quote from Teddy Roosevelt, which really points to this, you know, striving in the face of setbacks. I'll just let you read it. So this is all about, can we be courageous? Can we move out of our comfort zones and knowing that we're on the path to mastery? We're not going for perfection. We're looking at how do we develop mastery. But in doing so, we're probably going to, you know, have our face in the mud and so on. And we have to learn, whether it's other people giving us feedback or it's ourselves that are beating ourselves up thinking we should be better than this. We need to learn how to handle some of those situations. So let's look at some of the hallmarks of a growth mindset so that you can think about, in which areas do I think that I've got this, and which areas do I think I could probably do with refining them. So in a fixed mindset, as I mentioned, we've got this belief that intelligence is static. You were just born with a certain amount, that you were bestowed upon at birth this fixed amount. We have this desire to look smart. We have our identity attached to looking smart. We tend to avoid challenges. We give up easily. It's that element of not being able to tolerate that frustration, that in the learning zone. We can ignore constructive feedback. We see the successes of others as a threat, because again, we see that intelligence is only a certain amount. And therefore, if you have a lot, then that probably means that I don't have a lot. We have this perception that failure is the limit of our abilities. And I've put this in red because I think this is one of the real key differentiators, is that if we've gone so far and then we get some negative feedback or it doesn't go to work, doesn't go to plan, that's evidence that that's as far as I've gone. That's it, can't do any more, rather than thinking, okay, well, what can I learn at that point and do it differently? And unfortunately, if we've got generally a fixed mindset across the board in lots of areas of our lives, likelihood is we'll achieve less than we're capable of. But when we're in a growth mindset state, as I mentioned, we've got this desire to learn. We embrace challenges. We persist even when things are hard, because we've got this mindset and understand that this tolerance that we're developing with discomfort is actually where the growth edge is. That's where the magic happens. But it's up to us to think about how quickly and how far out we move out of our comfort zone. We see the successes of others as inspiration. So when we see someone that, is a bit further down the track than us, we ask ourselves, can I be like them? Like, how can I be like them? Rather than, compare ourselves and come off worse. We see failure as the opportunity to grow. So that's the big one. It didn't go right. What can we do differently? We recognize we've got this sense of agency, and this is why understanding neuroplasticity is a big component of this. And we're going for mastery, and we're likely to therefore have higher levels of achievement because we don't give up so easily. So a lot of this relies on what we make things mean. So we can see that with that response to setbacks and failure, if you've grown up with this mindset and this perception that you're not as good as everybody else, or you're better than everybody else, when something like that happens, the story that you tell yourself might just shore up and confirm that identity that you've got of yourself. But this quote from Viktor Frankl is so powerful, because what it essentially says is, if you've got the self-awareness to recognize that when something happens, before you then tell a story about what has happened, there is a space, and you can decide what you're going to do in that space. Are you going to think a new thought, or are you going to revert back to that habitual thinking? And if you choose to do something new in that space, that way lies growth and freedom. Now, of course, your ability to spot this will depend on how much internal space you've got, how much stress you've got in your system. If we are literally in survival mode because we've got so many things coming at us and we're already quite heightened, slowing down enough to spot these moments is very difficult. However, if there are some areas in which you want to motivate yourself, for example, let's just take the feedback example, because many of you mentioned that, if you are wanting to be brave and ask your manager or your colleagues for some feedback, think about what's the one area of feedback that you would like to get some objective thoughts on. Is it how you talk in meetings? Is it, I don't know, whatever it could be in your day-to-day life? And then think about when you receive it, like, be very careful, be very kind to yourself, but be very aware of what your choice points are as you hear it. And so that when you're being really specific about like where you want to change and grow, it becomes much easier. I've just got a question. Would you say complacency is an issue? Are you too much confident in one's ability can actually be damaging and hamper further growth? How would you say to people to navigate this in a healthy level of confidence in oneself? Yeah, I think it's funny because often when I'm working with people around complacency, that's often the fear that people have when I talk about you don't need to beat yourself up. And it was certainly one that I had. I was like, well, am I going to start just turning in work with typos? And am I even going to care if I'm on time and all of that sort of thing? But actually, I think that's just a barrier. And I think if you love the work that you're doing and you've got pride in the work that you're producing, that complacency is unlikely to creep in because we want to produce good work for itself. We like what we're doing, it's involved in the process. But in terms of complacency, if that's in a different situation, I think complacency I guess it could creep in. Uh, but I don't think people generally like feeling complacent. We all have a natural proclivity to grow and develop. Um, but yeah, I'll give that a bit more thought, but I'm not sure if I've answered that quite. If you were coming from that place of if I don't beat myself up, will I become complacent? So let's look now at how you might apply your techniques. And if you've got someone that's complacent in your team, this next section might help. So the first thing is, how do we then do this for ourselves? And I just want to give you some quick hacks for the moment that if you find yourself a bit stuck, here's what you can do in that moment. So use the word yet. Instead of I can't do this yet. Instead of I'm bad at this, I need more practice. So can you see I'm bad is very fixed. It's looking at our identity. Whereas saying I need more practice is focused on the process. And that's what we want to be doing. We want to be focusing on the process, not the outcome. What can I learn from this? Rather than going for someone's approval. Again, that's a little bit more challenging for us as people pleasers who want to make sure that everybody is impressed by us and in order for us to feel safe. But asking this, well, what can I learn from this and how can I improve? Important questions. When something doesn't go to plan, what did I learn? Thinking about the systems that were set up in order that result happened, and what would I do differently next time? Just building in this reflection is really important way to turbocharge your learning. This is a really good one, which I learned from Kristen Neff, who is set up the Centre for Mindful Self-Compassion. Rather than asking ourselves, am I good enough? We then flip it and we say, well, what would be good for me? So a few years ago, I was learning how to DJ. And this is a very, very exposing skill to be learning. And I originally would go into it thinking, I've got to get this absolutely right. And I realized that was just my old perfectionist tendencies rearing their head. And so the next times I played, I really just said to myself, I'm happy if I make 2 mistakes, but it's not the mistakes that I care about, it's how I deal with them. And if I can just go, oh, sorry, and just move on quickly, then that for me is a better metric of success than going for the perfect set or going for the perfect delivery. Because then you're focused more on the process of learning and it just doesn't feel so scary. Also gives you a bit more agency. So when you think about sort of creating an inner scorecard of success, that helps to make it more fun, but takes the locus of control from the outside into the inside. When we're asking, am I good enough? We're then looking out and that can make us feel rather insecure and not very grounded, which is not what we want to feel. And then if your inner critic says things like, you're not smart enough for this, you can then say, I'm still learning and every expert started as a beginner. I think sometimes this is where the imposter phenomenon can get confused with people just being an amateur. People just being at the beginning of learning something is different from feeling like you're an imposter. An imposter is feeling like You're going to get exposed any minute, and people think you're much better than you feel inside, even though the objective evidence is that you're actually really good at this. You're, successful externally, but internally you're terrified of getting exposed. I've got lots more to say about that, but that's a different program. So let's ask you to reflect on how often do you ask for feedback? Could you start to bring this in a little bit more in whatever area you feel like you'd like to be a bit more motivated in? How willing are you to learn from your mistakes? How willingly do you ask questions, even when you think that you should know something? If you don't know something, the only way might be the only way that you're going to actually turn that into knowledge and a useful learning experience for you and for others probably is to ask. It's just to be brave and to ask. Then what we're doing as we do these things is we're increasing our tolerance for discomfort. And that's really the bedrock of being able to grow and develop, recognizing that our self-worth is not on the line here, and being brave enough to put your hand up and say, actually, I don't really understand this. Could you explain it in a different way? Or am I missing something? I thought it was that, but it sounds like it's this. Just being able to have that dialogue will encourage more learning opportunities within your teams and firms. And you might have wondered how lobsters grow. And the reason I mention this is because lobsters have got this fleshy, soft insides, but this hard shell on the outside. So how on earth do they grow? Well, scientists realize that essentially what happens is they start to expand inside that shell. And that sense of pain and discomfort is a sign that they're growing. Now, if lobsters had access to healthcare and doctor surgeries, they might all go and say, please can I have some pain relief for these growing pains. But actually what happens is that they end up shedding that shell because they've outgrown it. And so when we feel uncomfortable, actually it's hopefully you just being on your growth edge. And can you start to reframe that feeling of discomfort with, oh, okay, I'm doing something new. I'm making progress. Yeah, that's it, Simon. Get comfortable with taking uncomfortable action. And it is a muscle. It does require going gently and slowly at your own pace, but it really requires what you make it mean. And can you recognize the progress that you're making rather than the result, even if it doesn't quite go to plan? The fact that you actually did it is to be applauded. And so here are some simple mindset shifts that James Clear shared. James Clear wrote the book Atomic Habits. I'm not hurt, I'm healing. I'm not losing, I'm learning. I was not rejected, I was redirected. I'm not failing, I'm getting feedback. It's not that I can't do it, I just can't do it yet. So negative things happen, but negative mindsets make them much harder. So you can see when you get into a really good, productive mindset, you're able to really reframe how the situation is looking. So I'd love to know now, I've talked a lot, is there a skill that you're looking to develop? And if so, what are some of the things that you might be able to tell yourself to adopt more of a growth mindset? What have I covered that you're like, oh yeah, I might remember that? Or anything spring to mind? Don't aim for perfection. I have never really appreciate that I have perfectionist tendencies, but I absolutely do. Yes, failure is an opportunity to grow. I think the thing Christopher, with perfectionistic tendencies, and this is why I call it that, not I'm a perfectionist, is because that seems very fixed, is that, yeah, we still want to produce excellent work. It's just that we can't have our entire sense of self-worth conflated with that. It's not on the line. We still want to produce the excellent work. It's just that we are not our behavior. So there is some separation between our sense of self and what we are able to achieve. Yeah, it's not that I can't do it. I just can't do it yet. Good. Build time in for self-development. Read, read, read. Good. All experts started as a beginner. Learn in small steps. Keep learning along the way. Don't aim to know everything straight away. Yeah. Good. Good, good, good. I think, yeah, the practice of reflecting every week, or particularly with your team, if you've done a big project or you've had a negotiation that went well or didn't go so well, the two questions that I'd really encourage you to ask yourselves are, what went well? So WWW, what went well? And then EBI, it would have been even better if. And then you're just simply always getting into this habit of striving for improvement and development. This is how I approach golf. Oh, it'd drive me completely mad. Yeah, good. Okay, so when you're learning something, just remember to picture that brain, hacking through and creating those new neural pathways. And that when you can visualize it, that's what's actually happening in your brain. It helps you to keep going if you understand what's actually going on. So let's take a moment and think about, if you're managing a team, how can you start to develop this growth mindset in your teams if it's not there already? And I think this is really important now, particularly as firms are working more hybrid ways. I think often when we sat next to each other, we would learn so much by overhearing people's conversations, and that doesn't happen in the same way as it used to. So I think that the role of the team meeting now has changed, and I think this can become much more of a learning forum. And I get asked to come into various teams and look at how we can do this. And so this really rests on this sense of psychological safety, which essentially means that we feel able to ask a question if we don't know the answer. We speak up with things that we are concerned about, or that we think could be, provide or present challenges. And I think this dialogue within the team is really, really important. And Amy Edmondson has done some amazing work in this field, largely in the field of healthcare, where she looked at the incidence of mistakes in surgeries, surgical operations, and found this really extraordinary result that the surgeons who were deemed very proficient were actually making more errors than the teams that weren't reporting the errors. And she thought the data had got confused, and what she actually realized was actually no, they were just more able to talk about their mistakes and learn from them as a result. So she's done a brilliant TED talk if you want to look her up. But she says really the ways to build psychological safety in your teams are really is to, if someone makes a mistake, then look at it as, well, let's look at how this system was set up so that mistake happened, rather than blame someone for making the mistake. Let's just learn so that we don't ever do that again. The second is to acknowledge your own fallibility. If you're a leader, if you're a manager of a team, is, you don't have all the answers. You need to draw on your team, and they're the eyes and the ears, maybe on the front lines of telling you what's going on out there in the market. And also, just recognize that, you haven't got it all sewn up. And thirdly, just to be really curious about what's going on out there and ask lots of questions. This is quite a different leadership approach from the top down, is to be really curious and ask lots of questions and get their ideas. But sometimes, and I'm not sure if any of you are going, yeah, well, that's all very well, but how do you actually get your team to talk in team meetings, which is something that I get asked a lot. And I think it's often down to the culture of your firms. But one of the things I encourage people to do is prep their team that we will be talking about these things. So, what have you learned? So rather than just saying, has anyone got any other business or anything like that, is to actually start making these learning opportunities. So what have you learned this week or this fortnight? Could be anything. What have you learned? What hasn't gone well and what did you learn from it? So that's that opportunity that we are probably going to be risking and failing. And if we're not doing any of that, then we're probably not taking enough risks. We're not learning at the rate that we should be learning. And then what good outcomes have you had? So that might be quite a different frame of your team meeting, but I think it implies that you're wanting your team to be on the edge of their comfort zone and starting to learn and develop rather than getting stagnant or complacent. So I think in answer to your question, Christopher, about the complacency, I think if you were able to ask this person, what have you learned? And if they say nothing, then that could be a further conversation about how is that possible? Not in a judgy way, but just kind of like that. That's when you might then start to get a bit deeper into the situation. And I love this quote, rising tide lifts all boats. So if you're using your team meetings as a forum for learning, then everybody gets the uplift. So just some top tips, just a quick look at the time. Teach them about neuroplasticity. I know I keep going on about it. I just think it's so fundamental to understanding our ability to reach more of our potential. Set the expectations about growth and innovation and risk. If we play small, we're not going to be, ahead of the curve. Create regular opportunities for feedback. If you say, we're all here to be better versions of ourselves and we've all got blind spots, so we all need to help each other grow and develop. Use team meetings to share learnings, not just updates. And I want to round off with why beating ourselves up doesn't work very well as a long-term strategy. So you'll probably know that when we feel motivated, we feel like we've got loads of energy. And that's because motivation is actually the release of energy from our cells. We are actually energy factories because the sunlight and the food that we get stored up in our cells, and then motivation relies on certain emotions to release that. So the emotions that release that are desire, excitement. They're the main ones. Contentment does a little bit. And so that's what creates energy when we desire something. So when we have this sense of the person that we want to become, we have a visualization of that. It sort of draws us towards it. And that's what unlocks energy. However, fear does the opposite. Fear drains and depletes us. So I could just stop there in terms of like how we need to think about how we use energy in our body. But if we are beating ourselves up, then what happens is, if you've got this very strong inner critic voice, is that we then are the attacker and the attacked on our system. And when that happens, our threat defense system starts to activate. That old reptilian part of our brain goes into fight, flight, or freeze. And when we in that state, we then release lots of cortisol and adrenaline, which, essentially is pumping blood to our heart and to our legs so that we can run away from any kind of threat. That then makes us quite jittery and quite jumpy. It's really not conducive to thinking in a very deep, insightful way. It's not conducive to having a deep conversation. It's not conducive to thinking in creative ways. It's simply very focused and can be useful in short situations, but really not over the long term. As Stephanie Creary from Wharton uh, university says here, fear can manifest into anxiety, depression, and hopelessness. And an environment in which these negative emotions are prevalent can become a very hard one in which to be productive. I mean, being depressed is not a very, we often, when we're in depressive states, it's very difficult for us to feel motivated. So the opposite is actually to speak more kindly to ourselves. And that has been shown to produce better performance. And this is because we're mammals. So mammals have, they're young, very immature. So they need a lot of protection. And the way that mammals nurture their young is through touch, it's through soft vocalizations. And that's what starts to create oxytocin and opiate mind states, which are really caring and conducive to deep thinking, to creative thinking, to connection, to trust building. And often those are the kind of states that we're looking to develop when we're negotiating, when we're working with people. So speaking kindly to yourself is really a big part of that. And just to round off really with a quote from Gandhi about the importance of how we talk to ourselves. That your beliefs become your thoughts. That's again back down to that perception that we talked about at the beginning. Your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. So really, so much of it starts with how are we perceiving, what state, what mind state, what mindset are we in, and that's then directing what we pay attention to. So just to pull all this together, try and be as kind as you can to yourself. Try and be on your own side and be intentional about which thoughts you're going to let in. Think about where you're placing your attention. Are you looking to the goal, or are you looking to the process? Remember, we shape our brain with our thoughts, and we are in control of them more than we think we are. Recognize, I didn't talk too much about this, but if one of the key skills to learn really is how to regulate our emotions. When we feel very stressed and heightened, it's difficult to spot that gap that I talked about, where we can choose which response we're going to have in relation to a stimulus or a trigger. And then we're going for progression, not perfection. So this is really about, can you get more familiar and more comfortable with those growth edges? And that way you will, really get on the right track to achieving more of your and attaining more of your potential. So I'm just going to round off. Hopefully now you understand why a growth mindset is so important in terms of fueling your success. We went over some of the hallmarks of a growth mindset. A lot of it is around how we deal with failure. But a big part of it is going for falling in love with the process, not the outcome, really. You've got some techniques to look at how you develop that in yourself and your team. And hopefully you understand now why beating yourself up just doesn't work very well in the longer term. So I'd just like to leave you with a quote from Churchill, who says, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. So, time for questions. And I'd love to know what stood out for you. What are your takeaways, if any? Oh, thank you. You've been putting resources in the chat too. What would you say discipline is more powerful than motivation in the long run? Oh, that's a good question. Motivation is a fleeting feeling, but discipline can be constant. Yeah, I think when it comes to motivating ourselves that we to do something that we don't want to do, often it's, yes, I would say having the discipline to do it anyway. is going to more likely lead you to the outcome, to doing it. I think if we sit around waiting to feel motivated, that day may never come. Mel Robbins talks about this a lot. She's got a book called The 5 Second Rule, and in it she just says, you count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you do the thing. And there's lots of sort of neuroscience reasons why that works, but yeah, she's a big believer in that discipline is more effective than motivation, and I think she's right. I think the other thing to say is, you can set up your environment such that it's more likely for you to take the action that you're wanting to do. Little examples like, if you want to do more running, make sure that you visualize that time in the morning where you're going to go running, and leave your running kit out the night before, so you're reducing any sort of friction getting in the way of you doing the thing that you want to do. So yes, in answer to your question, I would say that discipline is important. Kind discipline, because discipline can sound like quite a harsh word and quite a thing that we use to beat ourselves up, and yet I do think it's really fundamental. Have the decision to make decisions and follow through. Good stuff. It's been really interesting. I had no idea of some of my tendencies as a professional and parent. I really like the power of yet being added to statements. Yes. Being brave enough to try taking time to reflect and continue to learn. Yeah. Yeah, studies show actually, Veronique, that taking time to reflect is really one of the quickest ways to increase your learning. So if you can build in time to do that, I think it also then demonstrates that you're a really considered, reflective person. You're not just, flying off onto the next thing, onto the next thing, onto the next thing. It's just taking that pause to go, yeah, I didn't do that as well as I wanted to. What happened? And what can I learn instead? I've just put a QR code up, which is my Kinder Reminder newsletter. So if you are someone that would like reminders about speaking kindly to yourself, then that's the newsletter for you. Many of you might already subscribe to it, but it's just a short newsletter where I include a poem or a quote or something like that, just to remind you to speak more kindly to yourself. Any questions? Any other questions? Oh, I've got one in the Q&A. Is there a handout of this? There isn't a handout of this, I'm afraid, Rosemary, but I have recorded it and I will circulate the recording. What were the 4 points tips you shared a handful of slides ago? Oh yes, this was me just pulling things together that I have developed over the years. So set your intention. So your intention is about being kind. So your intention is about how you want to show up. Then it's about where you place your attention. So are you looking outside for approval, or are you focused on, I'm going to, do the best I can. If I make 2 mistakes, it's how I deal with them. That's where I'm going to place my attention. I'm not placing it on the applause I get or the statistics that might result from doing a post. It's kind of, am I proud of what I've done, essentially, is another way of saying this. Recognition is about really recognizing that you've probably got more control over your situation and your thoughts than you think you have. And that's particularly the case where you've had some time to downregulate if you're feeling quite heightened. We're much better at being able to name our feelings when we have some internal space, as it were, inside us, that we can spot some of our patterns more easily. And then lastly, try and aim for progression, not perfection. So try and enjoy the process and enjoy those moments of reflection. Take in the good when it worked, take in the good that you're proud of yourself, that you did this thing that was hard, but you did it, and that should be a cause of celebration. So I think, yeah, I pulled these together because often when we're working with perfectionist tendencies or imposter phenomenon, often what's underneath that is a lack of self-worth, and that's where I like to focus. How do we build that up rather than looking at accolades and accomplishments and so on to do that for us? Uh, would you say that would you say insanity drives success? For example, those that were the best in their field were obsessed. Oh, that's a good question. I think I'm not sure whether you call it insanity. I think you would call it maybe hyper focus. You know, if you look at someone like Michael Jordan and you chart some of these amazing sports athletes, or anyone, you know, Steve Jobs, anyone who's really changed the world, whether that's through achievements or accomplishments or innovation, they've definitely got an unusual brain in that they can just super focus to the extent that a lot of other stuff gets marginalized, because that's that's their talents and that's where they're focusing their attention. So I wouldn't call it insanity. I would just call it an interesting brain and a drive. You know, we're all slightly different, but that drive to succeed and to achieve something is uncommon in some in that kind of scale. Any more questions? I'll just put my my contact details on the last slide. If you didn't want to ask a question but something surfaces, then do jot my email down. I'll be really happy to answer them if I can. It's a source of endless fascination to me, motivation. And as you can see, I get very excited by the growth mindset. Certainly helped me a lot. So I'll stop there. But yeah, lovely to, thanks so much for all coming along.